Hey, and welcome to the Growing Leaders Podcast. This podcast exists because the topic of the next generation of leaders is a hot one, whether they be in the business community, the church community, or the young people, and everyone in between. So today we have Esther Yi here in the studio with us, which is pretty cool.
Yep.
Esther is a catalytic leader in the Korean church here in Gwinnett County, but also has a lot of experience out in Los Angeles, California. She's originally from Seoul, Korea, and she's got some pretty cool things to say to us today.
Yeah, it's going to be great to have her. But before that, if you have a minute, do you have a second?
I think I do.
Okay,
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks. Before that, I thought it'd be kind of cool to talk about something, which is for most of us, because I think it leads us right into Esther. For most of us, we know that our job is to love our neighbors. Like, it's the fun stuff. It's supposed to be this great and easy part of life. But I'm married. I've been married for like 30 years now. And one of the things that I've learned about loving is that loving is not simple. Like, there's learning. Like, I made the biggest mistake in my lifetime. Kathy's very first birthday, after I had met her, I bought her a book because I love books. And I knew that I got her a great
Kathy
book.
is my soul sister.
Yeah. So I give her this book for her birthday. And she unwraps it. She's so excited. I mean, everything had been going great. We had yet to have a fight. And she starts unwrapping it. She's so happy. And she's excited that I remembered to get her a gift. And she's opening it up and her eyes are filling with tears because she's so happy. And then all of a sudden something happens when she really recognizes that I've given her a book. It's for a minute, like she opens it. I'm sure it wasn't the first book she'd ever opened, but it very much felt like it. And then all of a sudden I realized, oh no, she's not crying now out of happiness. She's crying out of like anger. And she just looked up with tears in her eyes. She was like, why would you give me a book for my birthday? And I realized, okay, love is complicated, but we do that all the time. We think that, oh, I'm supposed to love my neighbors. So finally we do such simple stuff, such prosaic stuff, such boring stuff. And one of the things that's lost is our neighbors are unique. They're dynamic. Our old friend Dal Robinson used to say, you have no idea how much work God goes through and how much intention he puts into who your neighbors will be. So when you look across our cities and when you look across our neighborhoods, we have neighbors that are from places like Korea, like Esther. We have neighbors that are from Cleveland and neighbors that are from Boston, like your husband, far off, different cultures, right? So one of the really, really cool parts about spending time and getting to know an Esther is that you get to know a whole different culture, and it really arms you to at least start a relationship where you're in it a little bit more and you have a better chance. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're describing, one, is very biblical.
Oh man!
I think there was this guy 2,000 years ago that said something about loving your neighbors.
Wow.
But it also diminishes the otherness of other places, whether that be foreigners from New England or from Korea or Latin America. The closer you are, and not just proximity, but in relationship, in relating, there's less otherness. The great equalizer is Jesus.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really interesting.
Well, yeah. And for us, this is a fun one to deal with, not only East Asia, but Korea specifically. It must have been about, 20 years ago, where we were working, Boy with the Ball was first starting in San Antonio, Texas. And I was recovering from pneumonia. I've had pneumonia several times in my life.
A lot of stories can start with you recovering from pneumonia.
It is probably not a good thing to say about a person, but you're right, Christine. So I was recovering from pneumonia. I was getting better. And a friend called who was an InterVarsity worker at Trinity University, which is a university in San Antonio. And he, over on the side, was supporting a church, First Korean Presbyterian Church in San Antonio. And he was supposed to go speak at their youth group, but something had happened. There was an emergency and he wasn't going to be able to make it. So he just called me and he just said, is there any way you can make it? And I said, I'm not feeling very well, but I'm getting better. And I was antsy and I'd been trapped in the house. And this is a moment where, Boy with the Ball, we were moving so intensely and so much was happening that I had gotten sick in the first place. And we were going to have a team meeting that night, but this is a Sunday morning, and I head over to their church, and I walk in, and we walk into this trailer in the middle of a very nice church setting, and there's 60 dynamic young people. And I walked in and I was like, well, here you are. And they were like, you're the guy that's coming to talk to us. And they were so excited. And I said, yeah, I guess I am. And I said, what do I do? What happens normally? And they said, well, first we sometimes sing songs a little bit, but the guy who leads us in songs isn't here. So I said, well, I lead worship. Well, I was a worship leader at the time. So
Did you lead worship in English?
I did, which they were grateful for, because most of them didn't speak very good Korean, is the truth. That's what, part of maybe what Esther will talk about. But then so I sang, Open the Eyes of My Heart through my scratchy little pneumonia voice. And then we sang, and the presence of God filled the room, and you could tell that he was there. Then I just started to share. And when you're in a place where the presence of God is there, things come out of you that would not come out of you. And man, the Lord just reached these guys. It was the gospel, and you could tell they were getting hit. Many people, the tears were kind of going down their cheeks. And so at the very end, I was just thinking, what a great experience. And I was getting ready to go, and I was packing away my Bible, and this young girl who I think you know, Annie M.
I know.
You never met
her.
Annie. Well, Annie is worth knowing. She walks up to me, and she's 16 years old, and she has got tears in her eyes. She was one of the ones that was crying, and she said, you've got to come back. Like, you've got to come back more than this. Like, when are you going to come back? And I was like, well, no, I'm so sorry that I was just a guest speaker. And she said, we don't have a leader. We don't have anybody to help us. And she said, to be honest with you, she said, I've been made the leader, and I'm only 16 years old. And she said, we've never had anybody just preach the gospel to us like that. And like, please don't, you've got to come back. So, oh my gosh, I was very emotional. I went home, and there's a famous story in Boy the Ball's history, but that night I pitched to everybody, we've got to go help this young lady. And they all said, no, we're way too busy. And finally I just said, well, we're all not going back. I'm going back. And like, the famous story is the temperature in the room actually rose like 10 degrees in 2 minutes, because everybody cared about young people and they felt it. But that group, we knew for the next 2 or 3 years, we still know many, many of them. And they were so hungry for the kingdom. They were so hungry for the gospel. They were so ready for an experience with the Holy Spirit. And so I'm really, really excited today that we get to touch another part of, I don't know that every East Asian community is alike. I don't know that every Korean community is alike, but there's something about young people of every culture that the more ready we are to enter their world and love our neighbors, it could be pretty good.
Yeah, I think we can also switch to Esther at that point. But yep. I think something that I would add too that's really interesting, and I know from having heard that story before, is a lot of first-generation Americans, whether they be Asian, Hispanic, or other, struggle because of language. Yep. They're so acculturated. It's third culture kids. So yes. You're straddling the boat between these two different worlds, between, first world American quote unquote culture, and then your historical ancestral foreign culture that is your family history. And they speak different languages, and they relate to the world from very different worldviews. And so then oftentimes relating to faith can be challenging, especially if your family, almost more so if your family is coming from faith in another culture. Hispanic kids that grew up with church in Spanish, but they lived their entire life in English, can oftentimes struggle with relating to Jesus in English. Or it's they never totally related to it in English, but then in Spanish, but then they struggle in English. And I imagine it's similar within Asian culture and Korean culture, where they're being spoken to in a language they don't totally understand, yes. that their hearts aren't really grasping. So then longing for it in a language they do understand, where they live most of their lives, is probably pretty important.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Well, when we come back from the break, we'll invite Esther to come down here, and you guys get to meet her. It's pretty exciting. So today we're here with our friend Esther Yi, who we've known each other for about how long, do you think, Esther?
5 years.
5 years?
Yeah, almost.
Almost 5 years. That's great. Yeah. Yes, I think we met about 5 years ago, and over the last 5 years, we've gotten to know each other a little bit. And there's something that we share very much in common, which is young people, a heart for young people, and to see them come to know Jesus, but then, reach God's full potential for their lives. Mm-hmm. A little bit of background on Esther. You were born in South Korea?
Yeah, Seoul,
South Korea. Seoul has how many people in it? About?
Maybe 100,000.
Okay.
No. Total population of South Korea is 500 million.
Half a billion.
And then I
survivors.
think quarter of them live in Seoul, Korea.
Yeah, okay.
So it's really packed.
It's pretty packed.
But the size wise, it's only like, I don't know, like half of Georgia or like a little bit smaller than Georgia.
Yeah, that's what I was with you and your brother the other day, and he was saying that South Korea is about the size of Georgia, a little bit
Yeah, a
smaller,
little bit less.
a little
Yeah.
bit less. So a lot of people live in Seoul.
Right.
And then if you're flying in and out of the country, a lot of the main airports in that area.
Yeah, in traveling entire whole nation
Yeah.
takes less than an hour.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so you come from there, and then you ended up moving to the West Coast in the United States. Is that true?
Yeah. Basically, yeah. I was kind of like exchange student when I was college in Nashville, Tennessee.
That's
but
right.
eventually I moved to
Yeah.
Los Angeles, California for my seminary education,
Okay.
1999.
All right, so you
Yeah.
came over and you ended up in Nashville, Tennessee as a foreign exchange student
Yeah.
while you were in high school.
It was in college.
In college.
Then I went back to Korea and I graduated my college and went to Los Angeles, California for grad school at Fuller
At
Seminary.
Fuller Theological, which is a
Yeah.
great school.
Thank you.
Great. What did you study at Fuller Theological?
My degree ended up being Master of Divinity with family pastoral care and counseling.
Wow.
But my original purpose to go to Fuller was kind of pursuing psychology and just counseling.
Wow.
But the Lord led me to just pursue ministry. So
Yeah.
I ended up doing Master of Divinity with family pastoral care and counseling.
That's great. When would you say you started becoming passionate about young people?
I was always passionate about young people, even before I met the Lord, even before, because I grew up at church. I always interested in young people.
Yeah.
Because I struggled a lot as a young person,
Yeah.
Finding identity as a Christian, just person. So that just drew me just to look into young people's life really closely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was always interested in young people's life, but so I even before, my seminary education, I always volunteered for young people at church.
Yeah.
And I volunteered at YMCA. So
Yeah.
that was always, I just looking back, I just realized that, I was always in the place where I can meet young people.
Yeah.
And through connecting with them, I think, of course, I discovered myself too.
Yeah.
And then I could get connected with them as me being young person back then. And also I just wanted to kind of help them.
Yeah.
Because I was really struggling, finding my identity too. But then, once I came to Fuller, it became official because I had that background, and there are a lot of needs in Korean American immigrant society. They need someone who can help them out.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What's interesting about that is, so for a lot of us, and I know it was this way for Christine, it was this way for me, we were young people who were struggling. And first of all, every young person is struggling a little bit. The word adolescence has the DOL, dull, which comes from the Latin for pain. So there is pain. It's a becoming. When you're becoming something, it's difficult. But what happens with a lot of people who care about young people is the first young person they cared about was themselves.
Right.
Who were trying to make it or trying to figure it out. I know this didn't happen for you, Christine, of course. Yeah. But
I was always perfect.
you were, it's a little different. The walking on water, the things like that.
you.
Yeah, it's good
I
for
was not.
yeah. But what happens is you're searching for answers for young people, for yourself. But then the moment you start to find answers, and specifically in Jesus, when you start to feel peace, and when you start to feel joy, and you start to feel his love, then your heart fills with compassion about, like, what about those guys? What about the people that are still in the burning building? I've got to go back. And then what's great is you have some answers, at least clues, about ways to talk in a heart for young people. So that sounds like your story. So you had the experience of what it was to be a young person in Korea, and then you come here and you've been working with with young people of all kinds, but specifically working out on the West Coast. You were in the area, were you up around San Francisco or were you down around Los Angeles?
Yeah, Los Angeles.
Around
Yeah,
Los
greater
Angeles.
Los Angeles. Yeah.
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 And so probably what year did you move out here to Atlanta?
What year?
What year about?
It's 2016.
So 2016?
Yeah, 2016. And then I met you guys 2017.
That's
yeah.
right. So 2016, 2017, you come out here. Now, this area is interesting because there's Los Angeles has a very significant East Asian population, but Atlanta has a really fast growing East Asian population, a pretty sizable Vietnamese population, a sizable Korean population. So what made you come out here? Like what made you move to Atlanta?
Yeah, basically I can just say the Lord just dramatically moved us. You know, my brother, he's been here already over, I don't know, like 17 years.
Yeah.
You know, just working at Emory as a campus minister.
Yeah.
So I got a chance to kind of visit his ministry just to speak to his young people, like the campus or his church. And then as I visited more often, I just realized that they lack of resources compared to Los Angeles. You know, Los Angeles, of course, I think Los Angeles is 10 times bigger. I mean, Los Angeles Korean American population is 10 times bigger, which means they have 10 times more resources for young people.
Yeah.
But I just kind of realized that here, lack of resources.
Yeah.
And my brother needed help too. And whenever I came, I just felt like, just the Lord was pulling my heart.
Yeah.
But I never thought of moving here.
Yeah.
But actually, my husband, Justin, is the one, just out of nowhere, should we move there?
Wow.
He didn't know what he's saying.
Yes.
But yeah, through that, so we just ended up, okay, let's move there.
Yeah.
And then just give extra hands to,
To what was happening with your brother. So you're in an interesting situation in that you grew up yourself as a young person in Korea, but then you've watched the situation for Korean young people, both in Los Angeles, where there's a lot of resources and a large population, but also in Atlanta. So there's some things I'm sure that you can see that are similar.
Of course.
And there's some things that are different and
Right.
stuff. So first of all, what are some of the things that, whether it was Los Angeles or whether it was in Atlanta, what are some things that you have seen young people facing in the United States?
Of course, you know, Los Angeles has longer immigrant history.
Yes.
Which means their parents are more Americanized and more resources.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, you know, the young people in Los Angeles, they don't struggle. They have a lot of problems. And my husband was one of the problem kids in Los Angeles too. We went through everything, but they just had more resources and history. Like, I think I should say, I think LA has like a couple decades earlier than, you know, Atlanta immigrant history. So that way it's different. And I know that Atlanta is developing, so they will get there. Like, you know, they will have enough resources when the time passes. And then here, because the immigrant history is shorter than Los Angeles, so a lot of families adapting to, you know, American culture. There are a lot of families just moved from Korea, or they moved just recently, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So parents should struggle to adapt to, you know, survive in this new culture.
Yeah.
Which means there are more family problems because disconnecting from parents to children.
Yes.
More. I'm just saying more. Yeah. So I can just basically say, there's a common things and difference like that.
And when you're talking about resources, like that there are more resources there than here, what are some of the resources that you saw that were helpful, like in Los Angeles?
They had like definitely more youth workers. Yeah. And even me working in Los Angeles area, there are more professionals who can just support youth workers, like counselors or sometimes psychiatrists or some other nonprofit organization who can be partnered with church or like volunteer worker for young people. There are much more resources for that.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of like conferences or retreats or something. When you seek help, there is something that is available for them.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but here,
yeah,
of
so
course, it's
like
lacking.
you come as an immigrant, and it's not too different for Latin American, any kind of immigrant. You come to a new country, you're sometimes negotiating language and culture, and you're trying to figure out where you live and how you go grocery shopping, and that all happens. I know Kathy and I, we moved to Costa Rica, and we lived and had to figure all that
Right.
out. But then all of a sudden you're watching your children go through the kind of things that any young person goes through, but they might be struggling with language, they might be struggling with culture, they're struggling to fit in. And then for somebody who grows up in the same town that then they raise children in, you know the resources, you know how to help your children. But it becomes really, really tough for a family who's never lived someplace to figure out what the answers are. So one of the things that you're saying, though, that's just a real key, is when there are people who can build relationships with young people. And that's true, really, honestly, of East Asian young people or Latino young people or African American young people or anybody. When there are people who their focus, their heart is to come in alongside and help young people walk into growing up and adulthood, that helps. Would you agree with that? Is that one of the things that you've seen, is just the power of relationship?
Of course. Yeah. So definitely, what you said just, brings me to the thought. In Los Angeles, we had a lot of communities that young people can connect. Even like our family life, we can see that there are a lot of communities that we can relate to and make community with.
Yeah.
So that we can just help each other.
Yeah.
Here, one of the resources that you mentioned is kind of lacking of that very authentic community that can you really connect to or kind of have build up relationship. I see that it's growing, but everyone is somehow struggling to adapt to this culture.
Yeah.
So, it's one of the things that missed a lot here. But definitely, young people, that's what they are looking for. A place where they can connect and be related.
Yeah.
And usually young, youth workers and young people's volunteers, they're the one who actually offer, that relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's interesting is that we've heard this. We were meeting with the Gwinnett County Newcomer Center with a good friend of yours. And they were telling us that, granted, when a Latino family reaches out, they're really trying to learn English as a second language. They're doing stuff like that. But they said when a lot of the East Asian families connect with them, they're asking about the gifted programs. They're asking about college acceptance and stuff like that. So one thing that is a little bit unique about East Asian students is they're coming from families where there's an expectation to achieve.
Right.
And there are some pressures that exist.
A lot.
And so that can lend itself towards being in a new culture to some mental health issues.
Right.
And would you agree with that?
Of course. I mentioned that in that, what is it, the conference? Yeah. That's one of the things that young people, they already struggle with their own life.
Yes.
Discovering who they are, and especially as immigrant child, they just kind of struggle to figure out who they are. But on top of that, here are this great pressure that they have to meet the expectation of their parents who came here, to pursue the American dream for, their children. And parents just sacrifice a lot to make it happen. So children had a lot of pressure that I have to, fulfill this to, make my parents proud or be satisfied. So that's one of the greatest thing for, East Asian immigrant, children's mental health issue. They have a lot of pressure. Yeah.
One thing that we run into a lot working with certain families. So African American families, Latin American families, and East Asian families, the way that they function as families is called hierarchical, where you honor an older, filial piety, I'd say. Whereas like the way a lot of American families function is like the 4-year-old in the family is in charge, you know, like so they would call themselves egalitarian, or more flat, right? But sometimes what happens then is like a cool youth pastor connects in with a family coming from those backgrounds, and they can actually hurt the family by not honoring that. And so what happens is they come in, the youth pastor says to the kid, hey, are you coming to my youth group on Wednesday night? And they say, well, I'll have to ask my parents. Go, hey, man, unless you're willing to leave father, mother, sister, brother for his sake, you know, come on, who cares? Come on, come to it. Yeah. And then they're shiny, and they're the new culture. And the young person starts to connect more to them, starts to acculturate faster. And now the parent feels like, I'm losing my child. And it's great that it's a youth group, but I'm losing my child. And so then they start to become stronger, which then in US culture makes them look more out of it. And so sometimes the way that you engage a family, if you don't come in and honor them, can actually almost create more problems, and long-term actually can create damage. So we see that all the time.
Wow. Yeah. Great insight. Yeah. That's what, you know, Korean Asian American kids struggle, you know, living in two different culture, you know, like they just live as two different person, you know, at school or in the society or American culture, and just functioning at, you know, the house. Yeah, so that's kind of tough thing for them. Yeah.
All right. If you had more money than any of us have, and if you had 20 of us, you know, including, you know, whoever you wanted, you know, great young East Asian leaders, great young whoever, bunches of Christines because she's great. And you would get to really launch something here in Atlanta that you believe could make a difference. What are some of the things you would want it to include? Like, what would be some of the, even if it's something simple that you would just want, you know, to be there more for young people, but what are things that would be in your heart to do?
Yeah, like there are a lot. I always have been dreaming, opening up a venue for young people. Like, you know, Austin, my brother, he's certified barista, to open up a coffee shop. It's because coffee shop become a place where young people can come and connect. And then, you know, eventually it's gonna be we want to make a space for people to just kind of release their stress. Like, we really want to include, of course, like, you know, this kind of nice studio or like music studio, but eventually place that they can worship and just pour out their heart, and place where they can connect to, you know, other mentors and, you know, volunteers, you know, as a person can relate to.
So a safe place, an inviting place, but a place where they can touch the presence of God, and where they can touch relationships with people who can help them. Christine, what are you thinking?
I was thinking you probably have some unique insight too, having come as a young person. I mean, so you came doing a study abroad in college, so still relatively young, figuring out purpose and like what you're made for. What was it like coming to a place like Nashville, Tennessee, which is like pretty Southern, and then going back to Seoul and then deciding I want more? Like, what were some of the challenges, or what were some of the things that drew you? And then what were some of the challenges then coming up as a young person into adulthood? That's really what a lot of young people face, and a lot of youth ministries face, is like shaping the hearts and minds of young people who are kind of coming into something, coming into who they are, who they're made to be. And so you kind of navigated that yourself in both in the South, and then also in a major city like Los Angeles, one of the biggest cities in the United States. What was that like for you?
It was really different because when I went to Nashville, Tennessee, it was an exchange student, and I had a cousin who's already at Vanderbilt, I was kind of staying with his family. So I was just student studying abroad. Like I was not that responsible for just gathering all my life together. I was just student. I was kind of exploring my dream. But I remember my mom always says that the first word that I landed in Nashville and I called her, and then she keeps saying that the first word that you said was, "Mom, it's like a heaven." Because in Nashville, Tennessee, that time in fall, so beautiful. And then, like back in Seoul, Korea, I was going through a lot of like comparison, competition, like low self-esteem and all those things. Nashville seems to be very peaceful. But later I just realized that until I really change from the inside out, this heavenly environment cannot really change me. So actually I had another struggle, which really led me to kind of deeper conclusion that I needed something more. Yeah. And then I ended up finding Jesus in a really, really deeper way. Yeah, it was a kind of gateway for me to encounter Jesus more. And then it was different. Went back to Korea, just finished my college, came back to Los Angeles for my fuller education. It was kind of different. That from that time, now I have to live my own life as an adult. Yeah. So it had a lot of responsibility, but it just kind of gave me a heart that I just knew that before I moved to Los Angeles, this is my promised land. This is the place where I'm just gonna pursue rest of my life. Yeah. I just kind of knew that, and then, yeah, it was a kind of two different journey, but it really inspired me to pursue more in this land for just discovering who I am in Christ Jesus. Also, like just connecting to the people here. Yeah.
You had known of Jesus and your family were in ministry back in South Korea. But here, when you were here, you ended up having a deeper experience with Jesus. Yeah. Was it more one-on-one with Jesus? Right. Or was it more in settings where you were around believers? Right. How did he get a hold of you that way?
It was kind of like more like I'm just getting rid of my kind of old wineskin and being a kind of new wineskin. Because I grew up in church. I grew up in Christian family. It could have been my culture. Yeah. And also it could be a lot of religious kind of stuff, hanging there. And then there were just still things that I was not really freed from. Yeah. But then when I just came to US, I was all alone, and that was a place where I can really face God one-on-one. Yeah. So I think just God set up a platform for me to just encounter him as barefoot and just naked, and just encountering just him as who he is and just who I am. Yeah. Yeah. So it was a great,
That's beautiful. Yeah. You are a person who encourages us to know you. First of all, you have a very cutting edge passion for young people. Like it's very cool.
Not as much as yours.
Cool. It's hard to out honor Esther.
She's so nice.
She's so
nice. You guys are so nice.
But then the other thing that's cool about you that hits us, and I think people will touch it in the words you just talked about with Jesus, is that your faith is very authentic and it's very tangible. And so that I think people love that. That's hard to find these days sometimes. So thank you for coming and talking to us. Hopefully the first time of many.
Mm-hmm. I have one more question.
All right, shoot.
If you had to say one or two things, it's up to you, to someone who, because you were a youth minister yourself for quite some time. So if you had to give some advice or something to a leader or leaders who are working with East Asian or Korean youth here in the United States, what would you say to them?
Well, there are a lot, but those who grew up, a lot of youth leaders, even at the beginning of my ministry, I was like that, a lot of youth leaders, they identify their pains with, young people. That's why they can show that great love and compassion for them. But sometimes when our passion for them, that is out of our own pain and wound, when that pain and wound was not properly dealt with Jesus, and even that pain and wound that was not completely crucified on the cross, sometimes they start with that identification and that sympathy and empathy out of their own pain, but actually I see that can swallow them up and swallow young people up. Yeah, so I just kind of encourage those people. I know that God is one who just recycle every pain of our life for the beauty that lead even me to young people's pain. But we have to be aware and just aware and sensitive to what makes me do this, like what's the reason I do this and who is in charge of it. Other than that, a lot of times we can just be swallowed up out of our own self-pity or just wrong-geared sympathizing. Yeah, so that's...
And you see it a lot. You see people who, there's a brokenness or pain that's pushing them out there, but it's not found resolution in Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
It's not found his comfort and his consolation and his healing.
Right.
So in a way, it's almost they can actually end up having even a negative influence in moments.
Right.
And then even if they were to be effective,
Right.
it's not sustainable because they're not coming from a place of peace.
Well, yeah, they're not relating out of a place of restoration or something Lord's done. They're relating out of really a place where the enemy has done something and a place the Lord really hasn't gotten hold of. And so then if that's the one thing the young person's connecting with, that can be damaging.
Right. No one is perfect. And I was in the stage that I was not complete, but I was just kind of wanted to help young people. But I see the importance of community. Although I was not complete, I still in the process of restoration. We are all still.
Yes.
When you have this, authentic, vulnerable, transparent community around you, we can just kind of work together to watch each other. But I've been seeing a lot of young volunteers who is just alone and just don't get any input or output, just kind of pursuing young people, but ended up just kind of killing, each other.
Yes.
So that's one of the things that I've been really kind of looking and praying and want to be supportive for that kind of environment.
That's a good question. And I think that's probably parallels or is true
All
across
cultures.
every culture, right?
Well, and that's like a probably if we really were to study it or look into it, like burnout. A lot of burnout culture is like you kind of you taking on the world. I mean, for me personally, it's like I can do it, and like you kind of pound it, and you go, and then it's like you're in this place all alone, exhausted.
Right. Yeah. So it's for all culture, but especially for immigrant culture. We have
It's already more isolating.
This kind of different pain that as growing up as a kid, as an immigrant parent, so they can deeply relate, but kind of sick way. So that's really
probably also a little bit more pressure to achieve,
right?
Becoming to
course.
be unique with them.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
It's great to talk to you today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you.
It's great.
Yeah,
thank you.
Well, that was great.
Yeah.
Esther's awesome.
Go Esther. She's like a superhero.
And she's so nice. She always keeps like complimenting you.
Yeah, you got to be a little careful not to get into this thing where she honors you and then you honor her.
No,
and then
thank you.
Because she's so great. And then it would go on forever because you could keep thinking of good things to say.
Yeah. That was really great. I think she offers some unique insight into a whole other demographic that we see here in our own county, but that's really kind of happening across the country where Big C Church is very multicultural.
Yes.
And the way we relate to each member of the body isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of piece. Because you can, to your point, with some of the hierarchical family structure pieces, you can over-honor family and diminish the Lord, or you can say something in the name of Jesus, but diminish the importance of family, and that fractures a family.
Yeah, you mess it up. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. One of the things that is also true is like, we get really caught up in the fact that there used to be a day where the way we all grew up and the way our grandparents grew up was the exact culture of our children and stuff like that. But almost nowhere in the world is that really the case anymore. And what you really start to do is just recognize what unique, beautiful qualities and characteristics and situations or circumstances that each group and each population in a city is going through. And the better that you understand that, it's pretty exciting. If you're a church, it enables you to engage people that you wouldn't be able to engage. If you are a marketplace leader, you can hire people, or you could find leaders that maybe otherwise you wouldn't be as ready to engage. But one thing that's really cool, and I don't know if it's going to work, but I'm hoping it could, is that like we talk about going and making disciples all across the world, but I don't know why, if you're a city that has a population from all over the world, why couldn't you be a part of reaching people from all over the world where you live, and then either through, their Zoom calls back home, or through them heading back, or through even you meeting a leader where something dynamic starts in another country, you could reach the world by just loving your neighbors.
Well, especially here, like we've said previously in Gwinnett County, I was looking at some of the demographics, but the Asian American population in Gwinnett County, in Metro Atlanta, so it includes Gwinnett County, DeKalb, and Fulton, is almost 200,000.
Wow.
So that's like 10% of the population is East Asian. So we have, we're talking about the next generation, and we're talking about really global reach missions, big C church kind of things. Like, it's all right here in our backyard. And it's really a matter of how we're engaging it. And there is no better way than your neighbors.
That's right.
The people next to you in the grocery store, or the house beside you, or across from you at a desk in school. Yeah,
that's right. So, here on this podcast, what we're going to try to do in the next few months and years is bring in really key influencers and leaders who have the pulse of different groups. And some of that may be different age groups or different points of origin. But it'd be really, really interesting to hear more about the Latino community, more about the African American community. And I really think when we're concerned about equity, when we're concerned about everything being healthy and right and equal, the most important thing that you can ever do is really get to know and love and know more about people. And that makes it all work better. So good job. Good question.
Thanks.
I like those questions at the end that you threw at her.
You did a good job too at kind of getting to know her, pulling her into the conversation.
Yeah, without going into the honoring loop. All right. It's great to be with these guys.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.